You're listening to The Film File, the film show for film geeks by film geeks. Sorry.
First cough of the day.
I'm going to do the whole thing again. Hello and welcome to The Film File. I'm Lee Ford.
And I'm still Andy Meakin.
That's good to know, because I thought otherwise you may or may not have been cloned. I'm glad you haven't, because that would have just got confusing.
It's only a matter of time.
Or that you're cloned, or anybody.
That I work out how to clone myself, and then I can send someone else to work and have some spare time to do all the other things that I try to do it with me week. Yeah.
I'm just still working on. I'm still procrastinating. I'm still.
Still learning English.
I'm still learning English. I'm still thinking. I'm still considering what I would do if I was cloned. There'd be two mouths to feed, wouldn't it? Really.
I'd send one of mine to the library to do research on
cloning, on how to survive.
How to survive.
Because you've taken this very seriously since we mentioned it willy nilly. That's just a throwaway thing in last week's show, and then you've just made. You were telling me the other day you figured it all out. But before any of that, we're going to give you what we like to call a
syphilis.
Little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Of news.
Before all that, we're going to give you syphilis.
Don't get too close.
Again, the same way that Blade Runner to Blade Runner 2049 had a huge chunk of the history moved ahead, we'll have the same again for a similarly.
It's a new song.
For a similar. Oh, I'm not even going to start that word again.
For a similarly themed.
For us, yeah.
For themes which are similar.
For a thematically similar approach to sci-fi, but obviously giving them a chance to be a bit more free and creative in what they can do.
Yeah, and also the fact that was the seventh take that you managed to get that line in in this particular edit.
Oh, if I had a clone right now, I'd have killed it.
So yeah, if you want to know more about the Film File and those folks behind it, all you have to do is this.
Head on over to Twitter and follow us at FilmFile UK. Check us out on various other social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, FilmFile UK, or drop us an email with any thoughts, suggestions, films that you love, films that you hate, jokes that we've made that you love, jokes that we've made that you hate, anything that you want. Just get in touch with us. Podcast at filmfile.uk.
And now it's time for this week's deep dive, in which Andy and I will take literally that, a deep dive into some classic movies, films we love, sometimes films we've not seen, sometimes films we've hated, but films that need a little bit of extra exploration. And this week, we're going to be talking about a 1958 American sci-fi. We're going to be talking this week about the 1958 American sci-fi horror film. Horror film. Why? Well, hey, Maggie, just look over there. There's a blob coming towards us. Oh, isn't it a beautiful sight, Mag? Isn't it a beautiful sight coming towards Eden? There's all those kids. All right. I tried to
apologize, ladies and gentlemen.
He's been blobbed.
Lee's just had a bit of an episode.
Lee's brain has just left the building. We're going to be talking this week about the 1958 American science fiction horror film, The Blob, which, on all accounts, looks like a bit of a terrible B-movie, but stick with us. It not only had the first starring role for a young actor called Steve McQueen, it's one of those that once you've seen it, will stay with you forever. The film features a growing corrosive alien amoeba, an entity that crashes to Earth from outer space. Of course, it wasn't going to crash to Earth from inner space, inside a meteorite, and it envelopes everything in its path in a small community of Phoenixville in downtown Pennsylvania. Phoenixville in Pennsylvania. Downingtown. It envelopes everything in its path in the small community of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, growing larger, redder, and more aggressive, eventually becoming as large as a building. Who's going to stop it? Well, a very young Steve McQueen on a motorbike was going to stop it.
You say a very young Steve McQueen. He's the most unlikely teenager
Yeah, and
in
let's
this
be
film.
honest, he
He
was
was
way
28 years old.
Yeah. I love how in old B movies that you got actors who clearly weren't in their teens anymore playing teenagers. I remember I Was a Teenage Caveman featuring Robert Vaughn, who looks like Robert Vaughn exactly as he looked in The Magnificent Seven. But anyway, this is a Jack Harris production and his first. Um, and this is one of those movies which, well, there were tons of them at the time, monster movies, B movies, but there's something about the Blob which elevates it out of that category. Now, is it the fact that the Blob is actually quite scary? Is it the fact that it was Steve McQueen as a 28-year-old teenager? Or is it the fact that it's just a piece of film iconography, including that song, hey, written by Burt Bacharach, did you know? But it's a film that holds up remarkably well. I, have never seen this at the movies, though I do remember once there was a double feature of The Blob and another film from that era, but I've only ever seen it on late night telly. And I remember thinking, this is pretty good, very squelchy, and a really keen looking idea for a monster. The acting is pretty terrible, apart from Steve McQueen, who has that presence to him. And it's very talky. People talk about what's coming as opposed to seeing it, but when you catch the Blob, hey, the tricks, even though they look phony, are pretty effective. Why do you think, Andy, that the Blob is one of those that's kind of surpassed that kind of dreadful B movies, not if not Z movie, and become something that still stands up and people talk about?
I think it's still, like you say, the acting's pretty wonky. And it has all the generic templates that all the B movies had at the time. You've got the professor, you've got the doctor, you've got all the archetypes through in there. But the one thing that stands out is the design of the creature. Every other creature is always been something that we've seen before to one extent or another. Be it, giant ants in Them, or be it a man in a rubber suit terrorizing people around the Black Lagoon. It's always been familiar. Whereas the Blob is just a blob. It's an unknown entity. And I rewatched this last night after I got in. And I've watched the nice digitally restored version, and it looks really good. Like you say, the effects are cheaply made, but they still hold up well because the way that they're used. The Blob attacking people, it just suddenly latches onto people and slides up their arm. The first guy who gets attacked, the old man, when it just lunges down the stick onto his arm, it's a bit of a jump shock moment, and it works. And it was done by the simple trickery of, okay, turn the camera upside, have the stick held up in the air, and the Blob is just draping down, and then we'll speed up the footage. Done. Simple effect, works a treat. And it's the unpredictability of it, because you don't know this entity. You don't know what this thing can do. And as it starts to envelope people or structures, it's like, where could this thing stop? It's getting bigger and bigger. There's the impactful scene of it, leaking through the holes in the wall in the movie theatre. And you can tell it's a model of the interior of the movie theatre, but you don't care by that point because you're caught by everyone panicking and running out. And that's what helps it. I mean, there's one bit of the effects that is absolutely dreadful, and it did make me laugh. And that's as it's about to envelope the diner, and it's a photo backdrop that they just lob a bit of Blob onto, and it's just like you even see the photo wobble, and it's like, you know what, I'll let it go, because by that point I was sold on it. And yes, it's pure B movie nonsense, but it plays it with a tongue-in-cheek knowingness, and I think that's what helps.
There was a sequel to it called Son of the Blob, directed by
Larry Hagman.
Larry Hagman, and that came out in 1972, and that was really sort of a horror comedy of sorts. And it was Hagman's first feature film as a director, and we probably know why he didn't go on to do anything else after this one, which is not very good. However, as we've said, Blob.
It is amusing that when Larry Hagman's Beware the Blob got released on VHS in the 80s, it was given the tagline, "The movie that JR shot."
Of course it did.
And for those who don't know what the reference is, Larry Hagman played J.R. Ewing on Dallas, and there was a whole thing.
Makes me just feel so old.
There was a whole thing of who shot JR and people wearing T-shirts of who shot JR. So it was a perfect marketing ploy, and it kind of worked because it built it up like an audience on home release.
But there was a remake of the same name, directed by Chuck Russell, and you know what? It's really, really good, and it does exactly what the Blob should have done the first time round. There's a lot of interesting genre favorites connected to this, including a screenplay by Frank Darabont, of course, went on to do The Green Mile that we talked about, and started The Walking Dead, and a real genre favorite. It's exactly the same story, but with modern day effects. It functions as a bit of a conspiracy theory film. The threat of the original film was an alien entity from outer space. The remake offers in making the threat a more of a biological weapon created by a secret government agency. And the Blob is closely followed by soldiers and scientists in protective suits. So it gives it a much more of a cynical egg. It gives it much more of a cynical edge, but plays into the idea of what the Blob is about, and it keeps it very much alive. Chuck Russell had come off the back of
Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And as I said, it had a screenplay by Frank Darabont. And the special effects are particularly gruesome because you don't just get the Blob, you get the idea of what happens to you once the Blob envelopes you, for want of a better term. And I love it. I think it's one of those remakes which is, of course, much better than the original film. A bit of an undiscovered classic. It's still got that B-movie charm, but it's fast-paced and it's gory and it's got enough thrills in it, packs a punch, and it's definitely a worthwhile remake.
It kind of gets overlooked by so many people, whereas other classic B-movies that were remade have either a cult following or had like box office success. You know, you talk about like Cronenberg's The Fly, which was a B-movie remake, or you've got Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake of Body Snatchers. You know, they've all got the prominence, but the Blob kind of just went under people's radar, and undeservedly so. It was a brilliant film. It's well worth checking out. Track it down and get it watched. I mean, the film was a bomb at the box office, and it took Russell a good few years before he returned to film with Jim Carrey smash The Mask. But it was a shame that he came off the back of, you know, a well-received Nightmare on Elm Street film. The third film is is considered by most people to be the second best Nightmare on Elm Street film. And then his film that should have been a success just didn't find its audience. Because of films like The Blob, watching the original one at an early age, that got me watching all the B-movie sci-fis that I could, and I've really immersed myself through them through the years. And that's something that continues through to today. With, you know, when I regularly say I'm digging through the trash on Amazon, that's usually me looking for the modern day B-movies. And in this day and age, you know, there's been franchises like the Sharknado franchise, which are the modern day B-movies. Yeah. They know what they are. They're having fun with them, and people embrace them. B-movies people throw out, oh, it's just a B-movie, as though it's an insult. But no, B-movies have a charm. They have a pureness behind them. You know, they're made for a bit of fun. And sometimes they can come across serious. Sometimes they can just be Sharknado. But overall, they are a way to just capture that whole... It's the drive-in element, because these were drive-in movie theatres that these used to get screened at. And it's all to capture that essence of what it is watching things in that environment. I've got a lot of love for B-movies. If you're on Twitter, look for the film crowd on there, because every week they do film screenings. They'll find out where you can watch these things for free online and put out a message. And anyone who wants to watch and tweet along with them as they're watching classic films, and they do particularly a lot of B movies, and they will discuss aspects of them. They'll have fun poking fun at them the way that you're supposed to with B movies. You're supposed to poke fun at the effects. You're supposed to find them cheesy. You're supposed to think that all the characters are corny, because that's what they are. Embrace the B movies and embrace the Blob. Just don't let it dissolve you.
There was going to be another remake, but that seems to have fallen afoul. Originally, Rob Zombie was going to do a remake back in 2009, and then in 2015, Simon West had been announced as a director. Whether we'll see another Blob, who knows? But the character lives on, can have lived on in Monsters vs. Aliens, for instance.
Yeah,
with the character of Bob.
So it's been inspirational throughout sci-fi and animated history.
Well worth checking
you can
out.
Find
certainly,
you can
check
you
out
can find the Blob streaming. You can find the Blob 1958 version streaming in its digitally restored format on YouTube at this point in time.